Anyway, that's on there. And a simple connection then from one end of the switch to the motor, the other end of the switch to 12 volts. You push it, it turns. So that's it. Now, so the next part of this then, and this caused inordinate amount of work because I did it wrong. I made some wrong assumptions. The cable coming out of the transfer switch on my coach was solid stranded wire. I thought that I put in a more flexible wire, so I cut a couple feet off of the cable, tried to put that in. That's a serious mistake. There's no way without taking that whole transfer switch out that you can ever get those wires, and I spent a few hours trying to get those wires back in. All kinds of problems happened. I almost came to the point of stripping one of the lugs and so forth. I could never get all of the strands in properly. You could tighten it up, but then you don't want there to be less current capability because not all the strands are in there because it'll cause heat and could cause a fire. So anyway, I took that all apart, put the original solid stranded wire in because I thought maybe these yokels that work on this thing had put in some cheap wire, but no, that's the kind that has to be in there. Then it would all tighten down. The male end, of course, has to go on the transfer switch end because you don't want any power exposed. Then the female end is tied to the cable on the the long 50 amp cable, flexible cable. If you're doing this, and probably this may be like trivial or obvious to some people, but what I strongly recommend is you get a welding glove or whatever it takes, something like that, because unless you got very special tools, I had to use a box cutter to cut the sheath around the cable. You don't want to handle that without some kind of real serious protection. So you cut it around, carefully peel it off, try not to cut the wires, and then you, of course, make up the connector for the female end of this thing. And when you do it, there's two of the connectors are I think 2 inches. And the white wire goes to the bottom, red and black go to the left and right sides of that connector, and that's very important you get this right. 1.5 inches is the bottom connector, 2 inches long, and you should measure it, are the left and right. On what I had to do, because I didn't see any other way to do it, is the green wire, I stripped it back, cut it, and then put a merit on that and used a solid strand to go up to the green or the ground, and that's electrically fine. Push that down so it wouldn't catch anything. Bolted it all together and so forth. But it's a real brute working with some of this cable in there. So that's how it's done. Then I mounted the male end, and it looks a little bit hokey. I guess it could be done better, but I mounted it so that it's on the wall of the coach. Given that I got kind of arthritis in my hands, it's really painful to undo these things unless you've got a simple way to pull on it. So you can push it in easily it's got a nice handle on it, and pull it out, and it's solid against the wall. And of course it's not going to go anywhere. So I'll put some Gorilla Tape over it and try and make it look a little better. You could make a mount that looks a bit better. This one worked quite well. I used plumbing strapping and then cut blocks of wood that matched up to the height of the handle at the back and put a block under the center to hold it. And it seems to work fine. If you wanted to do it a little neater, you could cut out a single block and use a chisel and mount it with a plate on it so it looked a little better. But it works fine. So the last part was to mount this into the coach. And again, this was a series of problems. Because these plugs are unusually large, they caught on the back wall, and I had to make blocks to offset the carrier from the wall by a couple of inches. What eventually happened, you can see here, is that there was 4 inches offset from the back wall, which tilted the device forward. A block had to be put at the back along the bottom, and then 2 blocks along the front in order to clear the plug when it comes through, and because plug for the bay to be put back into place. And it all worked fine because it didn't really use up any space that was needed anyway. It works quite well, and it spins the cable on without a problem. The motor works, everything works perfectly. The only thing that slightly needs change to it, and it's inherent to all of these designs, is the thing runs like some demented whirling dervisher. It just spins up, and then it's very difficult to control it. So I've bought a pulse wave controller to hook up to the motor to slow it down, and I'll probably do a separate video on that. It hasn't arrived yet, but it's relatively trivial to hook it up. All it is it simply pulses the current, the voltage on and off at maximum voltage, which is 12 volts, and then by varying the on and off duty cycle determines the speed of motor that the motor will be driven, but it allows it full amperage during the time it's on. So I'll do that next, and I'll post something on that, and that'll slow it down so it can be used in like a reasonable fashion. But it works exactly the same as it did when it was new. It just spins in that crazy fashion as fast as possible. Thank you.